Hello. My name's Caspar. Thank you, David. Thank you, June. Thanks for everyone for being here. So I'm just going to start with some artists that I've been looking at and then sort of follow with some processes that I've been doing for the show. So I tend to gravitate towards artists who either choose destruction or intuition as their sort of central focus. I've been looking at Carol Waite, who's a London painter, who sort of has a mix of both, painting beautiful trees, somehow capturing the darkness and human quality in trees. She sort of led me to ask how a tree can personify a human relationship to death. Yeah, and also I became interested in sort of how an artist can pose this question of what a tree can mean to someone. Yeah. How do you go to the next slide? It ain't it.
Oh, what's this? Oh, goodness. Ta-da.
Another British artist I've been looking at is Helen Martin, who makes these kind of collections of handmade objects mixed with fabricated objects. I love her relationship to exhibition making as a kind of language making, where every move and decision is to language and is to structure the kind of visibility of meaning. It's kind of collage in real, like 3D space, which is, yeah. I've been looking at Thornton Dial, who is an American painter, whose kind of practice memorializes waste with twisted metal, tangled forms, inherent sort of themes of destruction and rebirth. A more recent painter I've been looking at is a German painter called Mitchell Cahey. And he makes paintings that for me are very like sculptural and they deal with very like sculptural kind of elements. And I don't mean that they're sculptural as in the 3D, but they kind of become equal parts image, object, human, and non-human. I've been looking at Edward Kienholz, who's an American sculptor, who is interested in hypocrisy and like the hypocrisy of the object, which is what kind of drew me to his sort of also sculptural collages. He uses lots of found objects and like tries to find narratives, understand what is a narrative of an object and how different objects together can kind of break up those narratives. I'm looking at Robert Gober, who's an American sculptor. Um, very sort of domestic, like handmade, um, like assemblages that are like for me one of the most precarious or like in curious kind of investigations into precarity and like what it means to be precarious. So that's kind of how that's really inspired me for this project. This painting, The Ambassadors, I love this painting so much because it talks about death and vanity in this kind of very like bizarre way for the time. Um, Not only is there sort of anamorphically stretched skull at the bottom that looks sort of Photoshop rendered, interesting, but also the way the painting layers meaning through scientific instruments, tools, and globes. Also very much a collage, even though it's a painting. So as probably a lot of you know, Guy Debord is a situationist who's interested in the derived, which means to drift. And this idea of drifting through urban spaces is a method that I've been using to sort of subvert the routines of everyday capitalism that exists in urban environments. And my process of making uh, is through walking um, and riding my bike between my studio and home, um, often without like a fixed timeline. And it helps me to come to realize that these spaces are kind of like hidden emotional landscapes. So I heard from a friend that the bone beneath your knee, which is kind of like this bone just here, um, is named after a decorative pin that was used to fasten clothing that people in the Iron Age were buried in. Um, I liked how the death pin came before the identification of the bone. This for me became like a metaphor to how death is present even before you know yourself. And that's my one of the sculptures that I've been working on, sort of before I surface treated it. This is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows limbo sequence. When I was asked to show this tree that I made last year called Anonymous Tree by June and David, it became both this kind of opportunity for me to relook at what the tree work was doing, and secondly to honor uh, the my 2024 New Year's resolution, which was to make a tree every year for the rest of my life. Um, some of the elements from previous shows that I've had in the past 2 years kind of stuck out to me as important parts of what ended up becoming, for this project, a very intuitive, unplanned material exploration with death as a kind of central theme. Um, I'm curious about how I know that I will die one day and how that knowledge affects the decisions that I make. I went into this project with the idea that I could make a street gutter for Anonymous Tree, which would act as a new plinth for the work. For a tree made of plastic, a synthetic plinth felt appropriate. And so I found this foam that was sort of the leftover thermal foam from this rich person's house that they were constructing, and they just bought way too much of it. Um, the idea of a gutter fit poetically under the tree, and it somehow felt like it should always have been there to begin with. I share a studio with my friend Charlie Robert, if you know him. I texted him about this new work that I wanted to make, which I'd already started making, but it was very much like a collection of explorations of different objects, including the fibula and different things that I found and printed and handmade and had shown previously for different projects. And I really was trying to find a way where I could tie these things together in a sort of unanimous narrative, I suppose. At the time of beginning what is now the artwork titled Standing on Death's Pin, I had amassed an amount of sculptures and ideas and was trying to understand how they could read as a single kind of disrupted story, which began a narrative only to interrupt itself. So I messaged Charlie and I was like, Charlie, what do you think of this photo? And he's like, go forth. A plinth felt obvious, and I landed on this stretch of white, which is somewhere between plinth and a gutter. Um, I sort of went into using foam, not really knowing anything about it. And I talked to a few people who had used foam in their art before, but it's a very time consuming process. And I ended up spending about 15 hours in the studio every day for, uh, I would say, a month and a half. And towards the end, I was realizing that I was a lot more productive in the nighttime. So I sort of quit my job and then started waking up at 5 p.m. and then going to sleep at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I achieved this by with lots of caffeine, CBD oil, and beer. So I didn't really know how to use foam, and it was such a long process that I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed not knowing how to use it, but I definitely should have had a studio assistant. So I was told by a friend after I did this project that I should mix essential oils with enamel paint that I was using because it was really toxic and I was breathing that in the whole time, as were the people that were also in the space. So that was pretty terrible. I To make this plinth, I wanted to kind of approach the textures of the world which I was walking past every day. The kind of like banal worlds that you sort of walk past every day on the street, which is stones and concrete and asphalt sort of mixed together and made into this surface that becomes so normal. And I kind of wanted to make a sort of like theater out of that without it feeling like a play, if that makes sense. So I found all of these funny things like how to find a rock texture is just use a rock. I'll get to these points where I just would lose motivation because I was doing so many things. And in those moments, I would either have a coffee or stand back and take a photo. And then I'd have to tell myself to keep going. But it was these moments that kind of um, were probably the most formative for the work because I was able to see what it was. So this is um, sort of the second work as it sort of is drafted in the TCB space, which I was very fortunate to be able to use in the lead up to the show as they had 14 days between the last show and the fundraiser that's coming up. And it was just big enough to fit my 9.8 meter gutter that I'd made as the second work. I think drafting the work was really important as it just gave me a way of being able to actually see clearly what I was doing. And I truly think that the biggest thing that I've learned over the past 2 years from exhibiting is that exhibiting is very much a part of the making process and it should be treated just as importantly as everything that leads up to it. And I think that when you're actually making the work and those final fucking like 5 minute decisions, those end up being some of the most important decisions for the work. I literally and metaphorically felt and was collecting dust. Um, so I have to wrap this up, but yeah, I was collecting dust and I used that as a kind of surface for my work. And then I would bake it into prints as the sort of surface. Um, yeah, and then I ended up with this question. I sort of started with this question and ended up there, which is my interest in trees and my interest in death and how those two things are kind of married. Um, as a final thing, I want to kind of plug this uh, Substack that I'm about to make. we're about to release next week, which is called Reality Tree, and it's about artists who use the tree form. One of them is Dane Mitchell, who used to be my supervisor. Um, but yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. You should check it out. Thanks for listening.
Hi. Uh, cool. Hi, I'm Jieun. Um, Thanks for having me here to have a chat to you guys about my practice. I thought I'd start off by showing some images that I work with, um, just to give you a better sense of the kind of the themes and interests that my painting references. Selection is like the core of my process. I spend like an immense amount of time choosing which images to paint. Sorry, guided by there's a particular criteria. You might be able to catch it when you see the images. And once that decision is made, the painting process itself happens pretty effortlessly. Like I'm just having to execute or translate those ideas and images onto the canvas. Um, so these are some of the few that I thought it was worth sharing. I'm often drawn to images with qualities that have a sense of outdatedness, maybe a bit of kitsch, unfashionable, and a bit tacky, depreciating, not polite in an awkward sense, not in like a rude sense. Um, Not pretentious, not trying to be cool, and also not taken seriously by anyone. But I also don't know that like somebody could take it seriously. I think I find these qualities like funny in a way that sometimes funny and sometimes like even kind of cool. Mm, I'm also more interested in designs that we don't typically consider as design because they carry a sense of nonchalantness to it. They're not trying to impress anyone or be anything in particular. I also thought about them as the failed design at some point because it's not being taken seriously. Yet, I guess I don't see them as completely failing, rather a bit kitschy in that sense. Um, Looking through these photo references creates a sort of sequence that goes nowhere, just drifting between what's been being seen or documented without overthinking it. It's almost like a kind of casual subjectivity, hopping between images. I don't always recognize what draws me to a photo at the exact moment I find it. It's something I realize later, maybe even long after collecting it. Sometimes, like the decision to paint, it happens much later. Uh, so for the recent series, yeah, so this photo, actually I took this photo, and I was in that toilet and then came out of the toilet and I bumped into this guy like peeing in front of me. It was really awkward. Yeah, so like some of these photos, like cool. And these are the reference images that I've been exploring recently for the recent series that I'm showing tonight. I've been looking at these digital photo frames that were popular in the early 2000s, the kind of resemblance photo booth filter add-ons. I found a lot of them through like a 2015 blog posts that shared how to Photoshop tutorials. Um, so these like digital frames became a pretty interesting element that I've been exploring recently. Same with these ones as well. Yeah. Mm. And in terms of painting, just to give you a bit of an introduction, I usually start by flattening these selected images that I've shown you before, and reworking that failed design, and isolating or abstracting certain parts of the image. I follow a pretty simple and intuitive process by not trying to overcomplicate things. Been trying to focus on one thing at a time just because I think that helps to create more impact, especially given the minimal style of my painting. It's for the VCA grad show from 2020 during COVID. So, yep, last few years, been pushing a lot of these series in line, exploring repetition, and by doing that was pretty fully exhausting the reference images. And yeah, for the SE works, I wanted it to be less flat because already my paintings were so flat. So I wanted to kind of dominate a space or work around the space with the paintings that I've got. So that's kind of how it happened from start to end. And I was talking with my supervisor at that time, Ruth. She was like, yeah, it's like either fill it or nothing. It's like, no, you can't just like live in mid. Which I thought that was a good motivation to push it. And then in terms of the reference images that I was showing you before, this is a recent work from Monash grad show. The first piece that I made that isn't a painting. And working with photographs as a medium also was part of this tweak where it's not what we call a standard real work of photography because the quality is blurry and print isn't really sharp. And I brought this in for a print, like art print shop. And it was really awkward and like a bit embarrassing. But I just kind of had to own it and just be like, I don't know, I didn't really say anything to them. Just like dropped it off and they picked it up. But I like the disjuncture and odd gaps, like pairing as it almost felt like creating a meme in a way, which is a similar quality that I chase in my photographs. And the other reason was that I also wanted the photos to trouble the painting in a way when they were presented next to each other. So yeah, that was the process behind this work. And lately, I've been thinking about how much of the source image to show or reveal, like finding the right boundary where the painting still carries a clue from the original, but not too directly. So the series that I'm showing tonight, it's a sneak peek. It's essentially like a stacked pile of photographs with the absent image on the top. Painting the pile of photographs was a liberating feeling because I was able to reflect on that idea of images while thinking about these things. And to be honest, I'd been feeling pretty stuck for a while, like scrolling through so many photos and didn't even know where to even begin or like which one to pick and go. So this has become like a really fun process, almost where it felt like I wasn't painting, like I was painting nothing or painting the void. And yeah, like another note for these series, I was actually using black paint straight out of tube, which I remember when I first started painting, nobody was like everyone or someone. I was told not to use black. They were like, it was just so wrong and bad thing to do. And I fully believed it until like this time. And it was like such a guilty pleasure to use using it and like break the rule of that wasn't even mine, and I kept it for like, I don't know, 7 years. But yeah, it was really fun. This is all I've got today. Thank you for listening.
Is it just the mouse or keyboard? Hello, my name's Camille. I'm an artist and librarian, as well as one of the current co-directors at TCB in Brunswick. I've been drawing for the better part of the past decade, and it's a privilege to be here with you all today to talk about some of the thinking behind my drawing practice. When I was 18, standing in the corner suite of the Windsor Hotel, visiting my first spring 1883, I was asked by an awkward acquaintance, "Why do you bother to draw the way you do when you could just take a photo?" It would be cool if this talk could be some kind of answer to that question. But also, as I felt at the time and now, why does anyone make the way they do? Is it not like breathing or walking? I took a year and a half off drawing in the third year of my undergrad and the first half of my honors year. I was feeling pretty artistically lost and frustrated by the limitations of the drawings I was doing at the time. Tiny realist translations of photos I was taking to memorialize my late adolescence, tiny drawings that no one at art school really had anything to say about, other than how pretty they were and that they didn't know how I did them. When talking to Amelia Winata from Memo last year, Edie Duffy acknowledges photorealism is daggy. I guess similarly, I didn't feel very conceptually cool at the time. I broke my drawing hiatus with two A5 pieces for an exhibition with a friend at C3 Gallery in Abbotsford in 2019. The latter of the two was a small detail from Hieronymus Bosch's triptych of the Adoration of the Magi. It was the first in an ongoing lineage of drawing from historical artworks. Pulling source material from places that don't belong to me started in COVID. I was spending a lot of time pilfering National Gallery archives to find drawing subjects rather than completing my Library and Information Services TAFE assignments. And it eventually sprawled out to include databases like Wikimedia Commons, the Internet Archive, and other library and National Archive collections. It would be negligible to ignore how this practice of collecting and sorting disparate images stems from spending the bulk of my teens in the early 2010s scrolling through the copyright gray zone of Tumblr. I think while a lot of the material in the work that I work with comes from or has an air of another time to it, the way that I select images and have developed a visual lexicon is deeply informed by a kind of aesthetic curation that came with being on the internet during that time period. In conversation with Latvian-American artist Vija Selmans, American sculptor Robert Gober discusses how Selmans' later work becomes deceptive images. No longer are these recognizable renderings of stars and ocean waves the main concept of her practice. Instead, the paintings seem more a record of her grappling with how to transform that image into a painting and make it alive. I like the slow process of translating an image into a drawing, like they are being chewed out over months at a time. Similar to Selman's, when collecting source material, I am way more interested in finding the visually similar in images found amongst the deluge of internet collection sites, how drawing can make them feel alive, and I'm not so concerned with restricting myself to conceptual continuity. I'm hesitant of women. Okay. She's got things to say. Yeah, this new series of work is prominently for drawings of women in competitive chess and poker. I started off this series by searching for images of women in sports. Hence the outlier in this series being a child crying in a soccer uniform, which was the slide before, but I don't know how to get back there. I was struggling to find a cohesive collection of images and continued to find myself fascinated by the similarities occurring in the images of these women playing games of strategy. These images become like a game or a puzzle being reoriented through the process of drawing. This focus on visual similarity is followed on in my practice of copying and translating historical paintings. Oh my God. Oh, there we go. Slay. Recently, a friend and fellow librarian sent me a document on information maintenance as a practice of care. It said, if information is to be useful over time, something more than preservation is required. It must be carefully maintained. This library practice of attention and maintenance is reflected in the translation of historical artworks. In drawing, these artworks are maintained and cared for, a slow kind of looking maintenance of the library archive. The practice of copying old masters is a long-standing part of the Western artistic education. More so than its long-standing status, though, it's a kind of pedagogy that, while incredibly valuable, has lost its art school favor with the likes of life drawing classes, kiln firing, and color theory. Nowadays, you hear whispers of drawing departments being seen as the least cool of the fine art disciplines, which I think is a shame, especially in a world that is de-skilling and deliterating its people at an astounding rate in favor of automation. We must hold on tight to the artistic skills and knowledge that we have and not forget that there is so much to be gleaned from the past. An example of a prominent master copy is Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres's study of La Belle Ferronnière, originally painted by Da Vinci in the late 15th century. In order to prove himself one of the greats of his artistic generation, Ingres took on the Goliath of this popular Da Vinci at the time. Clearly, though, if one looks close enough at the two versions, you can see Ingres was not content with the efforts of his Renaissance master. In black chalk, the face in Ingres's work becomes more voluptuous, a stronger nose, a more pronounced part of the lip. And most notably, he's paid a considerable more attention to the detailed ruffles and embroidery of the ladies' garments. I like to see master's studies as a kind of playful forgery. There's something kind of delicious in the tension of testing your skills to see if you can recreate something challenging, something satisfying in tending to the information of an artwork, choosing what parts of the original to include or reject, something important in maintaining the archive. In 1770, Wolfgang von Kempelen debuted the Mechanical Turk, a faux automaton dressed as a pipe-smoking wizard in Ottoman-style garb, standing behind a large box-like chess table. This early-style robot was willing and ready to beat most, if not all, of its human opponents. Unbeknownst to its gathering audience, though, what appeared as a miraculous machine utilized hidden doors and mirrors to conceal a human chess player master within its chess-like table, moving levers and magnets in place of the wizard's hand. Though suspected for years, it wasn't until 1857, almost a century later, that von Kempelen's hoax was revealed. Conceived in 2001, Amazon's Mechanical Turk, or MTurk for short, contracted workers from around the world to perform microtasks that allowed the internet to function better. Coining the term artificial intelligence, Amazon crowdsourced tasks that at the time humans could do a lot faster than computers. We can see instances of these seemingly automated slippages everywhere, from tech giants like Amazon to AI chatbots being puppeteered by engineers in India. The curtain falls, revealing the humanity behind the machine. Sometimes I feel like a Mechanical Turk, like a printer. There is always that question of how do I draw them? which sometimes leaves me with a kind of amnesia that perhaps I didn't do them at all, that they just appeared. This amnesia hides the slowness that is intrinsic to these drawings, how they are being chewed out over months at a time. But then if I look closely, I can see the parts rubbed away, the intentional inaccuracies from the source material. I can see the hand revealing itself. I like the trickiness of these drawings. They too become like a mechanical chess playing box full of hidden mirrors and doors. So that is the beauty of drawing for me. The hand is always there, even when obscured from sight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camille, Jieun, and Caspar. I'm going to invite you all back to the stage because we've got some time for questions, and I'm going to get people to ask their question specifically to one of the three artists today, rather than one question to the whole panel. But if the three artists could come up, and if people have questions, that would be great.
Ooh. Whoa.
Anyone with a question?
Maybe not.
Do you have a question of each other?
I thought it was really funny that we all, like, that you talked about Robert Gerber and then I talked about Robert Gerber, and I know, but then like there were like, well, there were just like overlaps in all of the things that we were talking about. I don't know if you two spoke to each other when you were writing, but I feel like that's such a nice synergy that there were like, and then like we were both talking about collecting images and like early 2000s aesthetics. It was just like so nice and serendipitous that there were like overlapping themes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested in the thing that came up for me that was common was this interest in death. And you know, where you're actually talking about the death of a body, but you were talking about this exhaustion of looking through, not physical death, but the exhaustion of looking through images and coming to a point of dissatisfaction and almost disillusion with it. And Camille, you talking about not so much the death of an image, but the death of skill and the death of a process. And I'm kind of, you know, the whole purpose of this show is not to have answers, but rather to raise questions and perhaps look at affinities. But I just wondered if the two of you might talk a little bit. Is death or the end of something a big part of your thinking?
I would suggest it is.
Do you think of anything?
I get where it's coming from. In terms of like like completely exhausting an image, but I just don't think I can end the life of an image almost. And there's so much more bigger connotations to death than just kind of, I feel like it's a bit too like a big word to put it on the glossary for my practice.
I got it.
It's a bit scary.
Yeah, I got it. I
think there's another interesting parallel between our practices, or at least in the show, which is like the color. Like we're using a lot of black and a lot of white.
Sure, come see our beige show.
It's very monochromatic, and it's like kind of emo.
A little bit.
I don't know if I think about death very directly, I'm probably like personally quite anxious about dying. But I think as I was talking about with maintaining the archive, it's sort of like this preservation of things after they've ceased, I guess, like their original productivity. And I guess like images dying through getting lost in the internet and then bringing them back in some way through like this re-pilfering of finding them databases. But yeah, I guess like I'm more interested in the conservation of things.
Yeah.
Whether dead or alive. Probably all dead.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone with,
Anyone got a question?
yeah, please. Bring it on.
Hey, Freya.
About like, because I know you work at the library,
Yeah.
and whether there is like a transfer of like how like the physical archive looks like and like the digital archive, like is it like currently like the transfer from the physical to a digital, or is it
Like in general in libraries or in my practice?
and all yeah, like in
No, it's a great
it's a
question.
question, but it's like does the things those archive
Absolutely 100%. And it was kind of like a joy to find the archive and I guess like libraries as a new venture in my practice. I think I've always been really interested in collecting. It was nice to, I guess, like study to be a librarian and get some like foundational understanding of like how things are organized. Yeah, I guess I just like systems of organization, but there are both like the physical archive and the digital archive do look very different and operate really different. And I would say to everyone, you should visit all of your public libraries in person. It's really valuable, even though like digital spaces have a lot to offer. I can't remember where else I was going to go with that, but yeah, go to your public libraries.
And there was another question. Yeah, please.
when you were in art school, what mediums were you did you do when you weren't drawing, and
Yeah.
what did drawing give you that they did?
Totally. I didn't include I couldn't include everything. And I guess I felt a bit shy about showing all the work. But for the year and a half that I wasn't, well, the 2 years that I wasn't drawing as my main form of practice, I was making a lot of like installations that operated quite similar to drawings in that they were a lot of tiny inferences into space. And I worked a lot with like wax. I was doing a lot of writing at the time. I really enjoyed coming to VCA and having access to the facilities that they have here. That's what they didn't tell me to say that. I like really just made that up. But I guess like I think RMIT was wonderful, but the support that I had here to like explore sculpturally was wonderful. And I guess maybe why I went back to drawing after leaving art school was because it was COVID and like I was working out of my bedroom. But yeah, I was mostly just making little sculptures about like I guess like longing and my body and yeah.
Study your undergrad?
No, I did my undergrad at RMIT. I did my honors year here at VCA. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, please.
Unnoticed, but I just wanted to ask, when you translate that into artworks, what part of the practice makes you feel like, oh, I'm not just making what I saw, and because sometimes I look at like those things and I'm like, oh, when I make artwork about it, why make the artwork when it already exists?
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think I change it enough so that it's not the exact same. Like I'd show you, like I have my paintings up and you wouldn't be able to guess the source and like where it's coming from. So I'm basically kind of just taking like a skeleton out of the references that I use to make something else. And I guess the I wouldn't say a problem, but I guess this is something that I was thinking about in a different kind of and perspective where if I'm making it as like a completely different thing to the source images, like why it kind of loses its identity almost. So that was another thing that I'm always kind of thinking about, and that's why I've started bringing in more figurative gestures into the paintings, and thinking about like the boundaries between how much to reveal and how much to take out. So I think as long as it looks like an artwork,
Literally.
I think it's okay.
Also, nothing's original.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything already exists.
Yeah.
Just keep doing.
Please, Emma.
Caspar, can you talk a bit more specifically about your interest in trees, relationship interest in depth? I'm just thinking, like for me, when I look at some of our old trees here, you know, there's a real sense of endurance that we see. They're quite stoic and they kind of outlive, you know, us as human beings. We don't often see when they came or when they're ill.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think there's lots of life in trees, at least how I look at trees. I suppose my interest in death and trees was like trying to imagine why, like, what it means to think about your own death as a human versus if you were a tree, how would you think about your own death? And I realized it's quite different where a human thinks about their death as kind of like an end and their birth is kind of like a beginning. And in that sense, they end up, or at least I do, end up narrativizing my life, turning into this kind of a story. Whereas like a tree is like more sort of thinking about like cyclical, you know, rebirth and these kind of things like natural forces. So it's just interesting to think about how we narrativize things when these things that are quite like personified, at least like I feel like a tree it's almost like the person that isn't a person that exists everywhere, is not. So
All right, last one. Thank you.
I don't think we collaborated at all, really. We all know each other though. We've all had shows at TCB, which is funny. But yeah, no, I don't think so.
maybe June
June put us all together. So and David,
and
June and David.
obviously David, but hasn't June met us at TCB or met me?
I guess I was on the board at TCB
Yeah.
a while ago, but yeah, we all have some sort of link.
Yeah.
Because none of that seems happy.
So cool. And yeah, these two just like I guess saw a lot of connections between all three of our works. Which is so nice. Yeah, the show looks really cool. I'm really glad.
I can answer. I can be the responsible older person here. Look, we started this process a couple of years ago, but I'll give you a sneak into 2026. We're starting a project that next year will be Emergent Fields 2026. This one is 2025. And essentially it's I don't even like the term emerging artists. I prefer the term artists in a formative period of their career. Because I mean, what we do as artists is not linear. We jump forward and back. And so, you know, for particularly with younger artists, I rely on June a lot. And we look at artists and look at where they are and where they've left from their departure point, where they are now. And with this particular show, where they might be. So we can talk about Jieun. Do you mind me talking about we talked about Jieun in terms of that long linear work, but actually the work that emerged for the show is a very, very different work, even though it's related to that language, it's a different show. So we want to give artists the space to have emerging ideas as they're happening. Does that answer your question? Great, great. All right, look, on behalf of everyone here, just thank you for being here today and thank you for taking us through this. It was extremely generous of you to do that, and we look forward to celebrating with you tonight at 5 o'clock. Please join us. There are drinks, there's sushi. It's just a nice way of getting together and acknowledging the work of artists and our work together, which, you know, if you're in third year especially, I wish you well for the graduate season. Yeah, thank you, everyone.